Well, it is now 8 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome you all to our Presented by Men's Breakfast program. So our speaker will have roughly 40 minutes to speak to leave room for questions you may have. The program is officially over at 9 a.m., but if Gail can stay longer, we can continue should anyone want that. Today is March 12th. The same day in 1956 that Congressmen from 11 Southern states issued the Southern Manifesto declaring opposition to Supreme Court's Brown versus Education. The quote for the day is taken from chapter 78 of Tao Te Ching. Of all the gentleness and submissiveness in the world, nothing compares to water. And to tackle stiffness and toughness, there is nothing better. There is no easier substitution. Be submissive to overcome dominance. Be gentle to overcome toughness. We are resuming the Presented by Men's Breakfast programming by Zoom with, of course, the help of Gail Wright. And since some of you are having breakfast with you, we ask God's blessing. Gracious God, we thank you for the opportunity to be alive in interesting times. These times are fraught with tragic destruction in our midst of plenty, tragic upheavals in the lives of those completely uprooted from their moorings as we resume our busy days in our comfortable habitats in the ambience of incredibly beautiful days. We absorb our morning breakfast in the comfort of our warm homes powered by electricity and gas in ample supply. Let us also remember that your work has only begun. We bless this food we shall obtain that makes us strong for the work of healing in the world as we are led by our Lord and Savior and your Son. Amen. Now we turn to a scripture which focuses on beginnings. Beginnings are the theme for the day. And I am warning you that you will be asked to put some flesh on the scripture. So remember as many of the words as you can, especially the nouns and the verbs. The scripture is Genesis 1, verses 1 through 5. And this is from the New International Version. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. Our program 2 weeks from now will feature Eric Maddox. He's spoken at Men's Breakfast in the past. He is the founder and director of the Palestine Podcast Academy. It is an initiative that aims to connect Palestinians from across Gaza, Jerusalem, and the rest of the West Bank to learn the mechanics and philosophy of podcasting and to put the tools of independent media production back in the hands of the people. Today, our speaker is well known to most of you. Our pastor, Reverend Harry Eberts III, will present Baseball, My Call, the story of his beginning career. Now is the time to recall the words of today's scripture and find as many of them as you can in the announcement that was set out. In the beginning, starting before college days, the pursuit of pitching baseball simply filled a void. And then, with his emerging excellence in the sport, his life began to take shape, becoming baseball-oriented. Harry will describe his motivations and what drew him deeper into the game, what he did in perfecting the pitch, and the satisfactions he got from the sport. He will reflect on the life lessons from this phase of his life and how those lessons learned established a firm foundation for the next phase of his life. It is my great pleasure to present to you the Reverend Harry Eberts III. Harry.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim, for that introduction. Thank you for showing up on a Saturday morning. You'd be doing a lot of things instead of listening to an old guy tell baseball stories. And we're not only going to do that, though. First of all, let me just acknowledge, Jim, that you picked one of the big classic Bible scriptures on baseball when you did that in the beginning, because you can even say then in the big inning. And that's how we often look at things in the big inning. And there have been many big innings in baseball life, in my life. But the one right now I want to focus on before we go into the baseball story is to acknowledge that life is not all baseball. Baseball is not life, that we are dealing always with things across the world that demand our attention. And although I found through the years that baseball has been a respite for me, that sometimes later on in some of my darkest moments, I could only dream of being at a baseball game so I could be held by those 9 innings or more and not have to worry about anything else. I did that often early on. But we can't ignore the fact of what's going on in Ukraine today. We can't ignore the fact of the violence that's taking place and that the people are dying and that there's turmoil and pain and suffering all over the world. So before we begin, I really want to acknowledge that and see how we as a group that's gathered here together, there's 14 of us I can see, that might just share how they're feeling about what's going on in the world, in Ukraine, and get that out there so that we can then perhaps tend to the things that we had talked about earlier, that Jim had mentioned in the publicity today. So any thoughts as we gather, as a people of faith, as a people that are trying to seek the ways of nonviolence and peace in the world, any responses, any thoughts, anything to get out?
Well, I think one of the things that's on the minds of many people is the possibility of nuclear war.
Yeah.
And I know we don't hear a whole lot about all of the dangers that exist in the actual possibility. But I think that we're in a time that is probably more fraught with danger than even the Cuban Missile Crisis was. And so that's one thing that, I don't know, Bill Eklund, for instance, is an expert on these type of things. And if you're interested in learning more about that, Bill would be a good person to talk to.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Any others? As you know, we often find ourselves in conversations with people, but maybe not in a conversation with more people like this that we may not know to go to coffee with and talk over important things like the Ukraine. But any other thoughts? And what I'm going to do is include a lot of my talking about what I learned from baseball as it might apply to what we're dealing with in the world. And so we can move into it and always have Ukraine with us, and other violent places across the world with us. But anything else we want to get out before we even begin that? Yes, Jan.
Well, as you know, Harry, and some people know, I spent about 5 months in Ukraine a few years ago, and so for me, it's every time I see the young man on television, I'm always looking to see if there's someone I know. It's so heartbreaking for me. I just can't even to see old men weeping, pregnant women all bloodied. It's and I think Russia has done this before, and obviously there have been other places in the world that have experienced this kind of thing, but it's every night in front of us on our televisions. It really brings it home how, the violence in this world and the destructiveness, it's just unbelievable to me, really, the depravity of what's going on. I can hardly comprehend it.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. And we have a young man who's attending our church. He has for the last number of years. His name is Max, and he's Ukrainian. He works up at the labs in Los Alamos, but he's Ukrainian. He's been shaken every time I've seen him at church each Sunday. He's not the way he was before. He's really been shaken by this, with family and friends back in Ukraine.
And I don't know if you know this, but he told me after church on Sunday that his brother is in prison in Russia for protesting.
Oh my goodness, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have a chance to meet Max, please reach out to him. He's a young man, rather tall, and you'll probably recognize somebody that's young and dark hair and tall in church. So thanks, Jan, for all of that and the connections you have. Any others?
Harry, one of the things thank you for this great question and the connections. One of the things I've wondered about is how sports, and I'm thinking sports all the way up to professional sports, but starting with even just being in the audience, in the stands, I wondered how sports exhibit our inclinations toward violence. It starts with competition, I guess, and goes to violence. I think baseball, for today, baseball is not as violent as even basketball and then football. But I wonder how that kind of competition, in my mind at least, has taken the place of international, even sometimes interpersonal expressions of violence. I think sometimes it aggravates some of those expressions, but we go to battle. We use that language even with sports teams. We love to hate the other school, even in town. We love to hate the other community because of something happened in a football game 15 years ago. Well, I think sometimes that can be a healthy outlet even for this sense of competition we have. It's I don't know where to go with that between Russia and Ukraine. I don't know that they're necessarily have competing sports teams, but it's interesting timing then to think that this all has, at least in our awareness, has sprung up since the Olympics, where we saw pictures of Vladimir Putin in the stands with the Chinese, is it president in China? Anyway, what happened? Why don't we just take this battle to a football field someplace and duke it out and see who wins, and then to the victor goes the spoils, rather than having such amazing pictures of the destruction of life and property. It's just amazing to me. Well, I'm curious about that connection.
Yeah, great question, great connection. And of course, we all realize that by watching any sporting event, it seems, the competition can lead to feelings of the competition. The other guy, the other person is almost like the enemy sometimes, as you've been taught. Teams are so tribal, and cities are so tribal. And and you got to beat the other guy. You got to, this and that. The violence in language with sports can be very off-putting, and it can lead to, well, I'll just give one example. My dad was a pastor for 40 years. He's a man that worked for peace. He did all those things, but get him watching a football game or go to a game that I was playing in, and if anything happened that didn't seem right, or he got caught up in the action, he was known to have been thrown out of games. My dad, my pacifist dad, standing up for players on the field on my team. And so all those things are brought into the sporting event. And to be honest with you, later on, as I played, through college, I was getting so tired of the competition. I did not feel like I wanted to beat the other team. I was tired of winning as being the only way to have an outcome for a sport, for a game. I'd rather have had, a chance to enjoy playing against each other, and who cares who won, and we can go on and have a good time afterward. All those things are mixed up with sports. So Randall Ballmer, who was here with us in January, that Bill was able to get a professor at Dartmouth to join us on a Sunday morning for our adult ed, is writing a book on sports as the new religion in our country, and how religion has brought about so many wars through the ages. And what does that mean for us as a nation? And so that's a packed question, Bill, and maybe we'll get to some of that even as I go through some of the things I've learned and how it applies to what we're dealing with the war in Ukraine and other, places of conflict. So thank you for that grounding as well.
One of the new sports that's kind of gripping the country is pickleball, which I'm a champion of. And it does have a lot of aspects similar to religion, because it brings together a confluence of getting your exercise, improving your body and building neurons in your head because of that, and energizing your mitochondria. And it's also social. It fills a social need. And since it's outdoors, the COVID issue is really big for it. And so that's kind of helped it get through this COVID season. But yes, there are distinct types of players who play pickleball. And some of them, all they care about is winning. Mm-hmm. And there are other players who are kind of interested in enjoying the sport and spreading the sport and introducing new people, teaching them how to play the game. And I kind of fall in that latter rubric, though I haven't really started any beginners clinics yet, but I may do that. But it's sports, I think, just reflect life. Mm-hmm. and we have all types.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, John.
That sort of brings to mind too, what are we teaching our children? I mean, I remember, as a parent, when my kids were little, my son played hockey, and there were some parents, it was terrible. And, and that's what the kids see, and, they imitate parents. And so, I think often the parents are more invested, I guess, in winning than the kids are. And it's a bad message.
Exactly.
And I remember some of our chants we would sing at football games, and we didn't think about what they meant so much. We were just shouting away, hit him a lick, harder. And I'm like, that. I look back on that and I think that's terrible.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Isn't it amazing all the connections we might have? We may start out thinking we're talking about one sport like baseball, but it expands into our life and into how our society reflects sports, and sports reflects society. So Jenny, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just going to respond to what Jan asked about what are we teaching our children. Some of you may know I went to a Quaker school, And we had the 4th grade Olympics. And I had been taken to gymnastics since I was 3 years old. And I was winning every gymnastic event. And the phys ed teacher asked my father, who also went to Germantown Friends School, would it be okay if we didn't give Jenny any more gold medals and just gave the silver person the gold? And he said, okay, sure. He wasn't happy about it, but as a father, but there are some educators who try to do things a little bit more equally and fairly. I'll just never forget that. I had a very unfair advantage and they recognized that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Well, why don't I start then with some of the things I was thinking about. And as we know, life and Ukraine and anything else gets into these conversations, and I welcome that. My arms are open to wider conversations from what I might have perceived first as just a baseball story. But I have played baseball ever since I can remember. I think I was 4 years old when I would play with my brother's friends. He was 4 years older than me, so I was playing with 8-year-olds, basically on the little diamond at my school in Worcester, Ohio, Bell Avenue School. And I got to bat as a 4-year-old with all these 8-year-olds, and they all moved in because they thought, oh, just this little kid isn't going to do anything. And I hit it over their heads. And so I got street cred after that as a 4-year-old. And that was really the start of my thinking that I love baseball. And I was always known to have a baseball bat in my hand or a baseball. Growing up, baseball was my sport, even though I played soccer and basketball competitively a lot of my life as well. But baseball was always my go-to game. We moved to Southern California when I was 7. And Southern California, if you know Southern California sports, it is as big as any place in the country. And Little League Baseball, many of our pros come from Southern California because they played all the time. And they played competitively as 8-year-olds. And even back in the days when I was playing from 68 until 71 for Little League, I was chosen on the top team. It was looked at in Pasadena as the legendary team, the Elks, when I was 10. And that team hardly ever lost because we had a coach who was a man who taught baseball. I could write a book on what Orrin, his name was, Orrin, and we could call him Orrin. As an 8-year-old, I could call a man by his first name, and that was really unusual. He had a flat top haircut back in the 60s when hair was going long. He taught us discipline. I could write a book called All I Know About Baseball I Learned in Little League. And that's really probably true. All I learned about baseball for the rest of my career, I learned from Orrin in Little League. I learned to know how to put on your uniform right. We got fined if we didn't put our uniform on right, and if we had any kind of creases in the front of our uniform, by the belt area, we were fined. We always have the creases go in the back of the uniform so it all looks straight and even. We would be fined if we left a person on third base and struck out and just left the person hanging. We would be fined for that. If we made errors during practice, we would have to run around the whole there are 4 fields at Victory Park in Pasadena. We would have to do laps around the whole 4 fields on the outside of the field. So it wasn't just a lap around the bases. It was high pressure, actually. We won all the time, but I learned early on that pressure was apt to get to me, and that if we lost a game, it would be one of the worst things that our team could experience. But I took it so badly that I started to think that maybe this isn't healthy for me. In fact, we were told one night at a game, we always played under the lights. It was hot in the summer in Pasadena, always under the lights. There was a lot of people there. There were concession stands and everything else. It seemed like big time baseball. even as a little league. We had scores of 3-2, 4-1, all these things. It wasn't air filled. It was a game that was well played. And even as little leaguers, moms told dad, who was always busy with different meetings, she said, you got to come out and see these kids because they're really good. Dad didn't believe that little leaguers could be that good. And he came out, and that's from that point on, he was at every game until I graduated from college. But I say all that because it seemed to me as a young person that this was a little larger than life and more than I wanted to do. We lost a game on a Thursday night, and Orrin told us if we won this game, we wouldn't have practice tomorrow. We practiced 11 months out of the year, and that was golden to me. I spent all my days after school and on Saturdays playing baseball. If we won, I would get a day off. We lost, and I wasn't worried about the loss. I was worried about, and I was crying because we didn't get a day off. You see the pressure on these kids, and then the pressure I felt for playing a sport that I loved, but it was getting to be more regimented. It got to the point where I didn't like how Orrin was treating the other players. It was too tough, and he didn't treat me that way, but he treated other players that way. And I told Mom about it, and that I didn't want to play anymore. And Mom talked to Orrin about it one day, and he was so surprised that anybody would be upset with the way he was treating us, that he changed his tune. He changed the tune to the point where my last game in Little League was it was leading towards the Little League World Series and an all-star team for Pasadena. And we were really good that year, my last year in baseball in Little League. And we were advancing, and our right fielder made 2 errors in right field that lost the game for us, and it lost the hope of going to Williamsport. And Orrin earlier may have been really upset and done this and that, and we had to run laps and all these things. He went out and put his arm around this little kid, and walked him back who was crying, and walked him back to the field as we all kind of packed up. And I thought, my goodness, this is what baseball should be about. You make errors. Now, I want to make sure we know this is one of the deals about errors. We need to learn from them. Error is always a bad thing, right? In life, you think that you make an error and it can ruin your life, or it can ruin ruin the game, or stop you from advancing to the next level. But I have learned. Now, I must tell you, I don't ever mean to lift up my statistics in this gathering here. If you want to know what I did in baseball, maybe we can go to coffee sometime, and I'll tell you all the stats. But I may sprinkle them in there a little bit. But I made 2 errors in college, and one was because there wasn't any second baseman to cover second base when a guy was stealing, and I threw the ball right there at the base, and there was no one there. That was called an error because he advanced to third. That was one of my 2 errors in college. But I welcome errors now. I learned not to like errors, but I welcome errors now because we learn from them. I didn't learn, if you don't make errors, you don't learn. And in life and in church and all that, if we don't try new things and expand what we're doing and make errors and find out what doesn't work, then we're not really doing what we should be doing. So I just want to offer this to everybody. Errors are okay, and lift that up. One thing baseball taught me early on was don't rub it. If you get hit by a pitch, you never let on that it hurts. I don't know if maybe that's loosened up a little bit, but in my day, if you got hit by a pitch, now I played baseball where we had pitchers that were throwing in the low 90s, if not 95 was the highest one. If you got hit by a pitch, that's a major league pitch, and that's the speed of a major leaguer. And if you got hit, it really hurts. But you never rub it. Don't show people that you're hurting. That doesn't work anymore. I've come a long way since then. If you're hurting, let people know. We try to cover up things too often, not only our errors, but we also cover up our hurts and our wounds. And so I'm kind of a baseball recovering from baseball. I'm a recovering baseball player in many ways, because I learned a lot of things in Little League that that haven't done well for me as I've gotten older. Let people know that things are not going well for you, because if you keep it inside, it's going to just stay inside and fester. And stop me anytime if you have anything to say about these things, but I can't remember how many times I was hit and hurt, but I didn't want to say anything to anybody, and how that didn't stead well for me as I went through Hodgkin's disease and leukemia. I was always trying to say, oh, I'm fine, I'm good, I can deal with it. And I was more concerned with other people than I was with myself, with what I was going through. And that didn't help me either through the years. So keep that one in mind. Put a bookmark in that one. One thing, and we can have a chance to talk about all these things a little bit later on as time moves forward, but I'll just go through some of the things I learned again. One of the nice things about baseball, though, I'll get some nice things in there. There's no clock. They're trying to put a clock in nowadays. You have to pitch within a certain number of seconds and so forth to keep the game going. But why? I mean, there's so many pressures to keep time going that there was a real sense of I don't know, relief that there wasn't a time clock. Innings last as long as innings last. Games last as long as they need to. And there was a poetry about that. And I really love that we weren't confined by time, and that you could do a lot of things. And you can even come back from being 14 runs down and win the game in the last inning. And it's all possible. There's possibilities in baseball that other sports, most sports, don't have. And so that was a lot of fun that way. You know, one of the other things I learned is that you'll never be perfect. You know, if you have a 300 batting average, you are at that threshold of being a really good hitter, in pros especially. And that means that 7 times out of 10, you did not get on base, right? You were not successful 70% of the time, but you were still looked at as being good. How cool is that? You know, I mean, that is just, how much have I thought that I have to be perfect in life of what I do? I must tell you, I am still looking to give the perfect sermon. I think about 1,000 sermons, if I count them all up. I am still waiting until I can walk away after saying, thanks be to God, amen, and say, that was it. That was so I'm still waiting. I have, you know, a few years left, whatever that means. But for baseball, it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. And I love that. Now, here's just a stat. Here's a stat, and I'll get into something else that took place in my life. When I was a junior in high school, when I was a junior in high school, my batting average was .476. It was the second best batting average in Chicago. And I played at Evanston High School. And so I had a lot of offers starting to come my way for moving into college and what that means, Division I and so forth. And so I was feeling really good about what I did, who I am. I could strut around saying I batted .476, whatever that means. As you find yourself on winning teams all my life and playing well. And then something happened to me in early June of 1976, right after my junior year in high school, a week after the summer of the regular varsity season ended. And it was between that varsity season and the summer varsity where we played all summer long. I had a little minor procedure done with a little lump behind my right ear. For 3 years, doctors had said, oh, it's just a cyst. It had not gotten bigger, but it was bothering me with my baseball cap. And I thought, might as well get it done and take it out. Well, I was sitting in my room upstairs a few days after that operation, and the doorbell rang. And my mom was downstairs. I was upstairs, and it was summer, and I knew something was wrong. I ran around to see the front of the house and see who was there. And I could see that it was my doctor that was part of our church who did the operation. He came to our house. I was frantic. And I went back to my room and I was shaking. And I finally had the nerve to go downstairs. He was gone. Mom had, I think, gone to her room. I found my brother and his fiance who were outside. And I said, Randy, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he said, well, let's go find Mom. And so Mom, Randy got Mom. She came downstairs. She was all tears in her eyes. And she said, well, the doctor said you have Hodgkin's disease. And the first thing that came to my mind was the movie Bang the Drum Slowly. Anyone ever heard of Bang the Drum Slowly or seen that? Robert De Niro was the catcher in that movie. He played as catcher for the New York Yankees. He turns out he had Hodgkin's disease. His last game was as a catcher. A foul ball was hit up in the air and he was twirling around. He could not focus on it. The ball landed about 5 feet from him. He fell to the ground. The next scene or two, he was in the hospital. The next scene, he was dead. That movie, I hardly ever remember seeing, but I remember that scene. And they hardly ever said it was Hodgkin's disease, but I looked it up in the book and it was Hodgkin's disease. And I knew right then in those few moments after hearing Hodgkin's disease that I don't have any future. I'm going to die. And so within those few minutes, my life seemed to have changed totally from a 476 batting average kind of season where I was entertaining the thought of playing Division I baseball to whether I will live long enough to even play another game. All summer long, that summer, I had 5 weeks of radiation treatment. I had operations. I had tests done, scars to show it. I couldn't walk later on after very well. Later on in the radiation treatment, it was the old days. It was the dark days of radiation treatment where they just did a lot of just piled it on and they couldn't pinpoint it. So my whole body, it seemed, was affected by it. I couldn't swallow, couldn't eat food. I lost 20 pounds. I did make it back for the final game of the summer varsity. I wasn't allowed to have any skin exposed because of the radiation on my skin in the sun. And so I wore a jacket, even though it may have been 80 degrees in August. And I had a chance to play one half of a game. And my first batting, I hit the ball in between the fielders and it was a base hit, but I was barely able to beat it out, even though the throw came in for the outfield. My whole life changed that year. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen to me. And so to shift gears from where I thought I would have a life of either a coach or do something more with baseball ended then. And so I just tell you that as a metaphor for the disappointment that can happen, how things change. But what this did was it changed my whole outlook to where I'm doing what I'm doing now of being in the church. I realized just this morning, thinking about it, none of my baseball players that I played on really checked up on me to see how I was doing. But my friends in my church youth group did. And the church surrounded me. My dad was pastor and made it easy, but the church surrounded me. They made sure I was doing okay. They kept in touch. They listened to me. And that was such an impression on me that I wanted to give back in some way. I wanted to thank the church, and I thought the best way was maybe to go in the ministry, because I wanted to have a place where people did that for others, because I had received it myself. And so that changed my whole outlook on what I was going to do with my life. I turned down different schools that I may have gone to. And I went to college in Worcester because they had a great baseball program, but also it was a school where it was a small school where I felt there was going to be community there. And I had grown up in Worcester and I was going back home in a sense. And so I played 4 years at Worcester, College of Worcester. We were one of the top 5 teams in the country in Division III all 4 years I was there. I learned a lot from a coach that was a lot like Orrin, who became the head coach at Kent State and Indiana University for the rest of his career. So he was a big time college coach, but he was coaching us and brought Worcester to prominence in baseball to this day. And we were the first class to go through that. But by the time I got to senior year, I was so burned out of competition that I wasn't even sure I wanted to go out senior year. It wasn't as important to me anymore. The losses became too big and the wins didn't mean much anymore. At times we were in all the baseball, we had the best record of all the baseball, no matter what division. We beat every Division I team we played. I don't know if anyone remembers Ron Darling. He was a big pitcher for the Mets. We played him my senior year. He was a junior. He had just been on the cover of Sports Illustrated. They thought they were playing some podunk team from the farm fields in Ohio. And we played them down in Florida. And we were down early on in the game. And we were playing at some big minor league stadium. So it was kind of cool. And then we started to come back. And so they brought Ron Darling from the right fielder as a right fielder to come in to pitch and just close the game out. And I was the first one to bat against him. And I'm thinking the whole way as he's throwing 95 miles per hour, which he did. I said, I'm batting against Ron Darling. I'm batting against Ron Darling. And I'm seeing the ball go faster than I've ever seen it before. And lo and behold, I get a base hit. The guy behind me gets a base hit. And then we come back and beat Ron Darling. And to win the game. They were so stunned at Yale that we would be able to do that. And 4 years later, Ron Darling was in the World Series and winning the World Series for the Mets. And so there was some glory in baseball, but there was also the fact that maybe I don't need to do this with my life. So one of those times when I was able to get away from the team for a lunch down in Florida with our spring trips, where we played 10 games in 7 days. Mom and Dad took me to lunch and in my uniform. And in between eating a cheeseburger and fries and having a Pepsi, Dad asked me the question that all juniors or seniors in college probably get asked at some point. So what are you going to do after college? And so before I finished my cheeseburger and fries, I had told Mom and Dad that I wanted to go to Yale Divinity School and wanted to become a pastor. I had no idea I was going to say that, but it came out. I must have been thinking about it, never really talked about it with anybody. But by the end of that meal, I had my future planned a little bit, and that's where I found myself, and that's where I find myself today. So I'm going to stop right there for any comments or thoughts, because I have a few more ideas about what baseball has taught me and what it can teach all of us, perhaps even about Ukraine and war and violence and nonviolence. But any thoughts? I'll stop talking. Again, if you want to go to coffee sometime or spend the rest of the day talking baseball, I can do it. I have the stories. I have enough of them to keep me entertained. It doesn't mean it matter if you're entertained, but I'll be entertained by sharing all the fun I had and all the exploits and all the good times. But I'll stop right now and see what. Yeah, Gail.
Harry, you and I have had this discussion before, but I would like to hear you expound for the benefit of the people in the audience. The brushback beanball approach that catchers have to utilize. I asked you one time how that resonated with a pacifist like yourself, and your response I still remember, and I think they will enjoy it.
Well, here's maybe the one you're talking about is the one I'll say, but if there's something more, I'll expand to your answer to that. But I was playing at Wittenberg College, University one time. I had a pitcher at Worcester who had been a transfer from Dartmouth. He wanted to play on a winning team apparently, and left Dartmouth to come to Worcester to play baseball. And he ended up in the AAA and all that kind of thing. He was a top pitcher, but he did not like the balls and strikes that were being called by the umpire at that particular game. And so he calls me up to the mound and he says, I want you, the next pitch, it'd be a fastball, and I don't want you to catch it because I want to hit the umpire right in the mask. And so, just the next pitch, just get out of the way. And I said, no, not going to do it. He said, well, you're going to do it. I'm the pitcher. And I said, no, I'm the catcher and I'm going to catch the ball. And so I caught the ball. He was mad at me the rest of the time. He told my coach, he says, I never want to have Harry catch me again. And so I never caught him again afterward. And so it was that story, though, that I said, that was kind of a drawing the line. What if I would have just gone along with that and just gone along with you hurt people because they're not doing what you want them to do? I refused, and I'm glad I did, always glad I did. What if I would have done it differently? It would have been terrible. I couldn't live myself, and so I caught the ball. I didn't catch him anymore, but I kept my respect for myself. Is that the story, Gail, or is that something else? Oh.
That is the story. You also ask you about calling for a brushback pitch, and even times when the pitcher wants to hit the batter. You had similar reactions to that.
Yeah, there's no need to hit anybody in baseball. There really isn't. You can get close. You can brush the guy back, but that's the point of the game. You brush the guy back so that he doesn't feel as safe to be up there, so you can throw an outside pitch on the corner, and he's not going to be ready for it. And so that's the whole strategy of baseball in catching. I called all the pitches all those years, and it was all about trying to psych the other person out. But you never want to hurt the person while you're doing it. And so the brushback is a great way of getting the person off the plate, so the next pitch can be the pitch you want. But if there's anything more to it than that, then it's not part of the game. So anyway, thank you, Gail, for bringing up some of those stories there. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Jan.
Well, you're probably familiar with the John Grisham book, Calico Joe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is a great illustration about a pitch, what a pitch can do to somebody, and also, of course, a relationship between a father and a son. But I would recommend it. Anybody that likes baseball, it's an interesting book. Great, good. And so as we're talking about baseball still and pitches and all that, and Jim, it started Jim asking me about how to throw a knuckleball last Sunday. He brought that up, and I learned all my pitches in Little League by my coach. I brought a baseball here, one of the baseballs that I got from playing in high school, I think. And I don't know if you've ever thrown a knuckleball before, but all you do, and I can't even do it much anymore, but you hold the ball like this so that you don't have any spin on the ball. You have your middle fingers there as a knuckle, your knuckles are on the ball, and the two outside, a thumb and the little finger on the outside of the baseball. So you throw it like that. You throw it at the same speed as you would a regular pitch, so the batter can't see that you're doing something different than a fastball, but the ball doesn't spin, and that means that the ball moves like this because the air currents as it's being, going through the air. And I didn't throw it a whole lot. I did once in a while, but I'll tell you what, I was down in Florida. I was kind of being recruited by Rollins College, which was one of the big, a small college in Florida and Orlando, but a lot of the guys from Chicago that were big players there were going down to Rollins College. And I went down there to see what the school looked like and talk with the coach. And as we were on the ball field, and by the way, I saw one of my old ball player competitors from a local school in Chicago. He was down there as a student. And I said, so some of the conversation got to, so where's the library? And he wasn't quite sure because he was going off to sail on one of the lakes there in around Orlando. And so I thought right then, maybe this isn't quite the academic challenge that I was looking for in college as well. And I don't think it was, so I didn't go there. But back to my story, as I was there on the ball field, Jim Bouton came by. Anyone know Jim Bouton? Okay, he was a pitcher. He wrote Ball 4, which became even a TV series for a little bit. He became a New York City sports announcer, a sportscaster. I was with a guy, recruit from Yonkers, New York, another catcher, and he was so excited to meet Jim Bouton because he knew him on TV. He didn't know about his baseball stuff as much as his sportscasting. And Jim Bouton was making a comeback in baseball. He was just a regular pitcher, but he was going to come back as a knuckleball pitcher. And he was trying to perfect his knuckleball to try out for the major league teams. He ended up playing for the Atlanta Braves that next year and decided to call it quits after the season was over. He said he had enough, baseball changed and all that stuff. He wanted us to catch him on the field. He was on the mound. We were there, 2 catchers, one from Yonkers, one from Evanston. And we had no equipment, but a catcher's mitt. And he's throwing a knuckleball. This is a major league knuckleball. And remember you say, if you get hit, don't act like you got hurt. Don't rub it. We got hit all the time because we couldn't follow the ball, and the ball would hit us in the shoulder and it would bounce in front of us, and we had no mask on and everything else. We were bruised by the time, but the ball was going like this, honestly, as he's throwing it. And so knuckleball, if you're a good pitcher, you have people just stymied. They have no clue where the ball's going to go. And so that's a knuckleball, Jim. And I wish I could have thrown it better because it's a very effective pitch, but make sure if you catch it, you're wearing equipment. Otherwise, you're going to get hit and want to be tempted to rub it. And of course, that's a no-no in baseball. Anyway, that's my little baseball story. But, you know, you've all perhaps have thrown pitches. It's all about the seam. And if you want to throw a curveball, you want to make sure there's as many seams as possible going, rotating. So the ball has a chance to spin with the seams that go along there. It catches the air. If you want to throw a fastball, you want to make sure you don't have as many seams, just so it goes faster. And then I would throw from different angles so that people couldn't always get used to the same angle. And that was always something fun. My coach always told me, Orrin did, never to snap your wrist because you're going to hurt your elbow. So we were never allowed to snap our wrists. And I always learned that. So I saved my elbow in all the pitching I did through high school. And so Orrin was really good for us. Always wear a sleeve, even if it's 100-degree weather, always cover your elbows so you don't get hurt. Your elbow. So I was protected by that because Orrin taught us how to do that. And I had some arm problems. Everybody in college had arm problems. I did too as well. I had to sit out the NCAA tournament my sophomore year because I was pitching, batting practice, and something snapped in my rotator cuff. So I did something to my rotator cuff and I couldn't throw and I couldn't play. Always be careful of your arm. One note, we're getting close to the time. I know 5 minutes left, but one note, I'm going to give you something I learned at fantasy camp in Florida when my church in Ohio, after my 10-year anniversary there, they sent me to a fantasy camp for a week down in Florida for the Indians. I hadn't played for 22 years when I went down there, and I was trying to get in shape for the few weeks I had to know about this surprise gift. And I go down there and I run and I throw and I, all about being drafted by whatever team some old pro is going to draft you with. And I was doing all of those things, batting and doing, And the next day I woke up and I could not move. I could not lift my arm over my head. I was playing third base and I had to throw like this because I couldn't lift my arm. And it's so embarrassing. I couldn't run. My legs were so sore after that one time of working out like I did on grass as opposed to up in the cold of Cleveland. And so on Wednesday, I was drafted as a pitcher, but I couldn't pitch. On Wednesday, I was supposed to pitch that afternoon. I was desperate. I couldn't run. And I saw a long line coming out of the trainer's room. And I talked to the guy, the last guy in line. I said, well, what's going on with this? He said, we're all waiting for an ice bath because everyone was so sore. And I had never had an ice bath before. You always ice your arm after you pitch just to keep it in better shape. But I thought, well, ice bath, I guess I'll give it a try. So I waited in line. I finally got up there. And believe, this is a tub. This is all filled with ice water. Okay, do you get the picture? Can you feel it in your bones, how cold that might be? But I was so desperate. They helped you into the ice tub, and you're supposed to sit there for 2 minutes. You can't stay more than 2 minutes. Well, the first minute was like excruciating. The second minute, you're all numb. You couldn't feel anything. So you get out. I get out, dry off, and I am a new person. All those aches and pains are gone. I could walk again. I could raise my arm over my shoulder. I could move. And so I pitched that afternoon as if nothing had ever happened to me, except I've been ready for this for years. And what's the word I want to tell you? Ice bath. It's simply 2 words. It may do a lot of good for all sorts of ills and ailments. So anyway, that's my one good thing I'll tell you that you can take with you today, ice bath.
Maybe we need to install one in the church for all us old folks that
you know
cold.
what? And we did. I think we'd be the healthiest place around. If we could all walk to church from wherever you lived, we could walk to church, and we could all do this stuff, doing the hymns by raising our hands over our heads, and no one would have any problems with rotator cuffs and all that stuff. And so there's my recommendation for you. I know we're 2 minutes away, but I had so many different things to share about what baseball has taught me. What it did, though, is give me a lot of self-confidence growing up. I knew I could do something. I knew I was known as a baseball player. All through high school, I was a baseball player. People knew me. It transcended race. I played soccer and basketball as well. I was known as an athlete, and I could walk in different crowds because even in the bad parts of the school, it was a integrated school, and a lot of bad things were happening in public schools in the 70s as they are today. But it was a rough school in many places, but I was safe because I would have friends of mine I played with, and they'd say, hey, leave Eberts alone. He's okay. And that's how I got through a lot of things without having a lot of violence go on. Unfortunately, that was kind of what school was like. It's a 5,000 member school, student population, and I was known as and I'll just give you this one more stat. I was 2 more stats to end it because I just glad I was able to receive these awards. But I was given the award senior year as a best athlete in the school. And then my high school coach retired 10 years after I played, and he listed me as the most valuable player of his years there, as 33 years of coaching Evanston High School. And so I can have always those things to look back on. And I often would do that even in leukemia days. He called me and to tell me that he said, look in the Sun Times tomorrow. I have something that I think you'd like to see. And that's when they listed, those kind of players that he listed as he retired. And I was going through leukemia stuff at the time. And I had just gone through something where I was in a coma for 3 days, and I couldn't talk when I woke up, and all these things. I had to learn how to talk again. And I could only babble on the phone to him, thanking him, because I couldn't get the words out over a phone. I still have trouble with phones because of that, because of what it did for my speaking. It's always a little bit of a struggle sometimes speaking in front of people or in groups, because of my memory of not being able to speak for a while and having to learn that again. So it's always been a challenge for me to be up there on Sunday mornings. And if I get through it, okay, I feel really good about it. And I think I've started to do better through the years, but I'm still waiting for that perfect sermon.
Gary, I want to say you're batting well above 300 on your sermons.
Well, that's nice. But what that means is there may still be 70% of the time you say, what? Oh, my goodness.
Okay, well above 500. Okay.
And
that gives me great comfort.
I always think of meteorologists. They can be wrong 70% of the time, and people think they're wonderful.
Right. There you go. So I've benefited from that. I've benefited from baseball without a doubt. It's kept with me. I'm an old player. I'm a legend in my own mind these days. My stats keep getting better as I tell the stories. I'm faster, I'm taller, I'm quicker than I was when I played nowadays as I look back. And that's the beauty of baseball. It was some old baseball players that I did down in Florida at the fantasy camp, and they will regale you with stories galore all the time, and they are funny. Baseball players, old baseball players, are funny guys. They really are. And so I always enjoy being with them. And I'll end with this. One of the real honors of my life was to have met Bob Feller down there at fantasy camp, probably listed as one of the top 5 pitchers in all of baseball history. Played for the Indians. He was Rapid Robert. He threw maybe the fastest baseball around until maybe recent times. 106, I think it was clocked at. And so he was 87 at the time. Wow. He was still pitching to the first 3 batters of each team. He would get in his uniform, be on the mound, and I was the 3rd batter on my team. And so the manager, and I've told this story to many people, I'll say it one more time. The manager told the first 3 batters, he said, "You're batting against a legend. You're batting against Bob Feller. We don't want to hurt him. And so whatever you do, don't hit it up the middle." And so, because I can just imagine, we could hurt Bob Feller, right? You don't do that. So he's on the mound, I'm the 3rd batter, and he throws one, remember that high leg kick over his head almost? It was now down about 4 inches off the ground, but that's fine. The first pitch was in the ground, it bounced in. Second pitch was outside. The 3rd pitch was coming inside and low, but I thought this might be my chance. And so I hit a shot to shortstop, but Pat Tabler, an old player for the Indians, obviously made an incredible play. Remember, my memory gets better as I go along. And it must have hit so hard that he threw me out before I got halfway down first baseline. The other translation of that is I was so slow that no matter what it was, I was only going to be halfway down before they threw me out. But what that meant was that I at least had a hit. I hit Bob Feller. I wanted the base hit, but it was good enough. And I got to know him a little bit more during that week, and he would call me the Rev, as other people did too, and talk about how that reverend on the field was doing this and that. And that was pretty cool. Fast forward about 4 years. I'm doing a service, a funeral service east of where I lived in Cleveland. Bob Feller lived about 2 miles from me, a beautiful home there. And we were walking through the woods. There's this little cemetery, walking through the woods. And I saw this one little pedestal, and there was one baseball on it. Nothing else. And I said to David, Dave, who's the funeral director, I said, "Dave, what's this?" He said, "That's Bob Feller. You know, this great pitcher, legendary pitcher, that's his grave right there." And I thought, man, if I could just be somebody like Bob Feller who didn't need the accolades, if we could just as a world be a Bob Feller and didn't need the accolades and all the fancy, all the lights and everything else, and just have a baseball there to say, this is life, this is important, but it's not as important as doing the right thing and just playing the game right and living right as well. And so I give thanks to Bob Feller, of all people I can give thanks to, for reminding me that baseball is just a game, but it sure can teach you a lot about life. So thank you, everybody. I went over time. Sorry about that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Let's all give Harry a big round of applause.
Thank you for listening to my stories. And I'm happy for any chai tea latte at any coffee house, and I'll tell you more as we go along. Or listen to your baseball stories as well. I'm gonna have a good time.
Very good. I would like to remind you all of the next program, March 26, 2 weeks from now, featuring our guest speaker, Eric Maddox, and his work in the Podcast Academy in Palestine. And don't forget, spring your clocks forward tonight. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much.
That's great, thank you.